everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Future Focused CXO. I have a very special guest today, Stephen Mitchley. He is the Chief Strategy Officer for the Vitale Group. And without any further delay, let me welcome him to our podcast and ask him to introduce himself. Stephen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jay. Steve, really a pleasure to be here. As you said, I'm Steve Mitchley. I've been with the Vitality Group or Discovery 24 years now. We're a purpose-driven organization, so our core purpose is to make people healthier. We're founded on 8 specific values, and I think it really makes your work experience quite incredible. As I said, I've been there a long time, 24 years. But through all that time, I think the anchoring of your experience in the values, in the core purpose, has made it very enjoyable.
Okay. So we got an exciting conversation here. I'll start by actually asking you the first question. In our last conversation, you did speak about some of the moments of your career and how they really fueled towards where you are, right? So can you share some of the pivotal moments in your career that fueled your dedication to purpose-driven and leadership transformation?
Yeah, with pleasure. Often people say to me, what exactly do you do? And being in an organization that's largely founded by actuaries, I feel like I'm an actuary by osmosis. But my answer invariably is I'm a reformed engineer. So back in the day, I was a mechanical engineer, super specialized in refrigeration. I was regional refrigeration engineer for Westfit's operations, which is a big mining complex, 4 different mines. I recall I was about 29 or so, and I was running a section where you're responsible for the legal health and safety of the folk that are working in that section as the section engineer. And one of the legal requirements is to make sure that the elevators work very well. Now, this is really deep mining. It's 3 kilometers underground. You have these massive lifts that go up and down, and they're called cages, which are pretty appropriate because there's 150 people crammed into a little box on 3 levels. Now, what you need to do as an engineer is protect those people, make sure that in an overwind situation, they don't end up in the headgear because that would be fatal. There's a series of trips or tests that you do, they're called trips, that protect the safety and integrity of that system. And I recall the one time we were doing our routine inspections, and there's one called the Ultimate, which is appropriately named that because it's a wire that goes over the headgear. So if the cage comes up there, all power stops. And there's the electrician's helper was leaning over the shaft, which is this basically a hole that goes to the bowels of the earth, and he was pulling on this thing. I turned to the electrician. I said, "Does he know what he's doing?" And I got the rote answer, of course. He's got his chains tied in. He's very safe. And I said, no, what I'm asking is, does he understand that he's protecting the safety of 2,000 miners? And this electrician was just dumbfounded. He said, I'd never thought of it that way. I had a conversation, and even this guy that had been doing this for 15 years, it was the first time that it was framed to him that he wasn't just doing his job, he was keeping people safe. And it struck me that there's much more to life than just doing what you were meant to. It was all about the purpose behind what you're doing. And at that point, I decided to pivot my career to move away from mechanical engineering or refrigeration and seek to understand better the roles that looked at the intersection of people with technology or with systems. I think I joined Discovery, a then fledgling health business, about 2 months later. That was beginning of 2000. And I've always been interested in that, not just the systems part of the house or the product part, but how does everything fit together? I was really inspired by this core purpose of making people healthier. And I think most of the people within the business also aspire to that. You have a good day, you have a bad day. And at the end of the day, have you made somebody healthier?
That's awesome. Hey, let me ask you, how does the engineering side of you translate when you've added that purpose? What sort of assistance do you feel that gave you when you were doing the work or connecting to people and helping them make decisions at Vitality that you would see as, okay, that's much more of an engineering thought process as opposed to a purpose-driven process? Because obviously it's to enable a purpose. But how did you find your engineering background helped you with that?
Yeah, great question. I think as a mechanical engineer, when I hired for a position, it became very obvious to me very quickly because I was told this. I knew nothing about systems development, and I knew nothing about life insurance or health insurance. So what on earth was I going to do for the company? And fortunately, I got a role as a project manager. And I think that engineering is less, from a science perspective, less about understanding how things work and more understanding what can you do with it. So that's a skill set that you really learn. Although you do some fundamental science courses, it really is about the application of science rather than deeper dive into science. And I think what I found is that discipline in itself helped me look at process, the knack for process, in a very different way. I was no longer just involved in moving something from A to B in a logical sequence and optimizing that. I love the theory of constraints. What I was now interested in is everything that surrounded it. How do people interact with it? How do people get incentivized to interact with it? How do consumers get incentivized to interact with what your purpose is? So I think the engineering discipline was actually a natural position for me to grow off of. I've been very blessed within the organization to have had a whole bunch of roles always gravitating towards problems, always gravitating towards either shutting something down, re-engineering it, transforming it, or starting something up. And what I have seen is over time, that base layer of understanding just gets richer and richer as you encounter more problems, and you're able then to put another arrow in the quiver, so to speak. So for me, the engineering skill set, I don't think I've lost. It's that base understanding that was quite useful. And that obviously gave me a technical insight into systems, because I wasn't daunted by the idea that there's this thing called a system or API, or it's a utility that has the same sort of pattern that I saw in refrigeration. When you're trying to move water through a massive gold mining complex with the aim of cooling people down, that's very similar to directing the flow of energy within an organization. It's remarkably parallel. I think as I get older, I see more things converging than diverging. So you spot the same patterns over and over again.
I think in our last conversation, you also spoke about convergence, right? Especially the user experience. And you want to meet people where they are, not physically, but digitally, right?
Yes.
So how are you achieving at your company, Vitality Group?
I think for me, Vitality is the ultimate convergence platform. And I say that because it takes a very non-linear approach to interact with people. If you look at healthcare, most of healthcare is focused on sick care. You don't actively engage in healthcare. The notion of patient engagement for me is a bit of a strange one. Patients are engaged. They're engaged in their sickness. People aren't engaged in healthcare because you don't think about being sick all the time. So what Vitality does is it turns that on its head. It says, in a shared value model, we're going to take value that can be accumulated through change of behavior, and we're going to bring that in front of the person to provide incentive for change. So in a real sense, we're getting into the day-to-day of the individual. A very practical example, we've got a platform, we've got point status, it's a game mechanic that people can participate in, but we're actually present on the phone, on the wrist, so whether it's a Fitbit or an Apple Watch. And when you see your exercise, you're creating quite a visceral connection between that exercise, the points that you're earning, and the value that the funder is now giving you. So you're converging the world of Apple, the world of wearables, Fitbit, Garmin, etc. You're converging that with the world of keeping well and ultimately of healthcare as well. It even extends into some of the rewards. We've got a brilliant system where you can get 50% off on John Hancock Vitality for an Expedia hotel visit. It manifests in Expedia. You don't come to us for it. You flow through us, end up booking on Expedia. We're not trying to replicate. So what we are trying to do is basically have the world around you converged into an experience that then is contextualized around your health. As we've seen over the past 24 years, we started with file transfers that quickly morphed into services, web services, and APIs. That's early 2000s. We even built our own bespoke CRM system because there's nothing that on the market that we could use. Fast forward to today, and you've got competent tools like Salesforce. You've got competent providers like yourself that help organizations bind into Salesforce. For me, that's convergence as well. It's convergence around a capability that is needed to solve a problem en masse. So what's been liberating, I think, is in recognizing how those things are converging over time, you can actually step away and say, let's put our money in this capability where there isn't a solution, and then leverage our partnerships, leverage capabilities, leverage vendors to deliver. And the delivery then becomes a lot more rapid. You don't have to do everything yourself.
So what would you say would be some of the more pressing challenges you've had to deal with at the Vitality Group? And how did you work through navigating those for strategic growth?
It's not specifically Vitality. I think this is a global issue. As things converge, and you can see it happening, AI is making it simpler to garner knowledge. And we can go into AI into quite a lot of detail. I think there's a fantastic opportunity there. But as it's becoming simpler to harness how do you take that convergence and channel it without disrupting the inevitable desire of individuality from people or organizations? I think often self-expression, which is a very good thing, manifests in very bizarre ways in organizations. If you look at legacy systems that you might have or legacy structures, those can often get in the way of a meritocracy of ideas. If you come up with a great idea, how do you leverage technology to expand that and repeat it without feeling the individual feeling that they're boxed in? These are two forces that are battling with each other. And I think that's something we struggle with. What you don't want is great idea replicated all over the show in unique fashion, because that's incredibly inefficient. You get like a tragedy of the commons. What you do want is a great idea quickly spread out and that more people are able to contribute. So I think most organizations are going through this at the moment. If you look at AI, generative AI obviously can create personalization, which is fantastic, particularly in healthcare. I thought a few years ago that two things that we should be focusing on is app-to-app integration, which is not really well done. API-to-API integration is well done. App-to-app, not so much. Two, Amazon's reach out and touch you, get the thing that you want very simply. That marketing capability within a program is very important for healthcare. That latter part, I think, has been emboldened by generative AI. You can take a body of knowledge, give it context, and then provide a very personalized interaction. So harnessing that from a technology perspective, I think is very cool. The second part is taking that knowledge and using it for co-piloting, whether it's coaching or helping a call center agent help an individual, because they don't have to know everything themselves and study it anymore. Those were the old days. Now the co-pilot can help them. So now you start thinking, how do you incentivize that? How do you train for that? The days of training somebody all about your product are over, because products are too broad. They can't possibly remember everything. The churn is too high, but you've got these tools that can help you. So I think for me, all of that boils down into two simple things. Can you use the technology to harness the collective wisdom? And then two, flip that on its head. Can you still create the power of individuality and creativity so that great ideas percolate to the top? Those are two struggles that I think we struggle to overcome and I think are important to address.
Everybody talks a lot about success. And there is a very nice article or a photograph I had seen where they say, you look at LinkedIn, everybody is successful. You look at Twitter, everybody is angry. That's how the posts are. Right? But what I wanted to ask you was, as a chief strategy officer, what are some of the challenges that you are facing and how do you overcome, especially in the healthcare ecosystem, which is honestly very hard to change?
There's two parts to that question. I honestly believe you should embrace challenge. If you want a non-linear career path, you should run towards problems. I've always said to folk who are leaving the organization, make sure that you're running towards something, not away from something. And only when they convince me that they're running towards something, then I'm comfortable that they're leaving, because you never want to just simply run away from something. But I also encourage people to run towards difficulty. We're stronger for the things that we battle with. That's how we grow. If you try to jump into something that is unknown, rest assured that there's a base level of understanding that is going to serve you well, and you'll be able to glean from that and add to your understanding. One of the challenges I try and tackle is find the things that are intractable, find the problems that are out there, because I think that's where the value is. From a healthcare perspective, I do think that most of what is around us is so institutionalized. There's a strong sense of not built here, and it takes patience and it takes humility to break into that. When we were selling solutions to employer-based wellness programs to employers, I always made the comment that if you've seen one employer, you've seen one employer. There's no one size fits all. The culture is always slightly different. They're always presenting slightly different problems, but with humility, you can say, look, we've solved X amount of problems. These are the arrows that we've got in our quiver, to use the metaphor that I used before. Let's solve this together. I think it's with that sense of humility that we're trying to get folks to see the value in sharing with the individual the longer term benefits of their behavior. Because you can only get there with a change in relationship. Healthcare is incredibly transactional. If you think about yourself, you might have a life insurance policy. When last did you log into your life insurance company? You probably don't even have a username and password.
Nope.
Yeah, exactly. John Hancock. Yeah, exactly. Because it's such a foreign concept. You buy the policy and you hope not to die. Yeah, that's the last time you want to think about that. Even healthcare. I don't think people gravitate towards their health insurer and log in and get the username and password. I do, because I'm crazy, because it's my industry. But less than 10% of people do that. And unfortunately, what that sets up is a passive relationship. I go to the doctor, I see what gets paid, and then I pay the difference. And that's about it. I think there's a real opportunity for an active relationship, one where you are looking at outside of sick what are you doing in your day-to-day? Because we know that there are 5 behaviors that cause the bulk of diseases, that cause the bulk of deaths and the bulk of cost. So what are we doing about that? Everyone knows you shouldn't smoke. Everyone knows you shouldn't drink. Everyone knows that you should exercise, that you should stand up from time to time. Everyone knows that you should look after your nutrition. And yet as a culture, we don't really do that in the present. So how do you engage with people where they're at so that there's this longer term benefit towards them? And I think that's where we found most of our value is created. But you can only get there with humility and listening to the unique problems of the customers that you're facing, because they always have a nuance or subtlety that you probably haven't seen before. However, as I say about convergence, you do see these patterns repeating themselves. I don't think that the challenges for the auto industry, we've got telematics business. I don't think they're uniquely different to life insurance, to PNC, which all of those are really better. And if you look at all the companies that pulled out of Florida, out of the West Coast, people are struggling to make money, and now it's become very expensive. That's not too different to healthcare. Healthcare is really difficult. It's very fractured. There's no real flow of data in between different players. And quite frankly, the end consumer isn't actively engaged in their health. They're actually engaged in paying for things, in palliative care and sickness.
So let me go back to my AI question. You did touch upon AI, and especially Gen AI you spoke about. And I was also at a conference a couple of months back, an IDC conference on Gen AI. And as we very widely know, there are 3 main use cases of Gen AI, right? That everybody is chasing, right? One definitely is about customer experience. How can I provide better experience to my customers? Leveraging that data and harnessing that data and things like that, right? And creating some co-pilots which my CSMs can use, right? Second is obviously the productivity part of it, right? How do I increase the productivity of my employees? And as we say, AI is not going to replace you, but person using AI is going to replace you. Right? So you better start using AI. So that's the second piece, co-pilots as they call it. A lot of people are generating that, right? And last but not least is the contract management piece, right? A lot of B2B companies are saying, oh, I have so many contracts. I want to leverage them to understand entitlements, understand what can I cross-sell, upsell to other customers based on usage of my product, what's bought, what's not bought, right? So there is so much of correlation. I think what I heard from you is that there is a third or fourth part to this Gen AI, right? How do you really get people more engaged into the whole healthcare ecosystem? Because in general, people are not engaged in the healthcare ecosystem, and that is why it has become what it has become, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's 2 parts to it. There's also part of that is a different view on not Gen AI, but the use of AI. Let me tackle that one first. Let's take underwriting as an example. Look at underwriting, decades of mortality and morbidity experience. We see that people who self-report or are measured to have these markers will have this risk of dying. So you generate these mortality curves, and based on that, you underwrite. Now, if you think about it deeply, that's basically taking a whole lot of information, observing it over time, and coming up with knowledge, which is no different to the application of AI. Where it fails and falls short is those curves look at population outcomes. They don't look at what happens within the population. What happens to people who have an aha moment and suddenly start exercising? We know that somebody who reports that they don't exercise has got a greater risk of dying than somebody who exercises. What happens to the person who is exercising today but gets bored and then falls off? So it washes out in the population, but that means that underwriting is deeply flawed because it's a point in time as opposed to continue being able to assess what impacts the individual, what drives them to change. And I think that's the application of AI that for me is incredibly exciting. And it's not just machine learning. It's taking machine learning, taking big data sets. You take the causal relationship between certain things and your claims experience. You can quickly pick up that there are 3 things that you should be doing if you're in this cohort. That's great. But what is the propensity of somebody to do that? That's when that Amazon marketing nous, which is also AI driven, starts coming into the force. I think there is tremendous opportunity for good. The second part of that is it's got to be contextual. So often that I'm getting messages, like Amazon is a good example of that. I look at a shirt, I decide I don't want a shirt. The red shirt follows me all over.
Oh my gosh.
Great insight. You had this interest. Let's put it in front of you. Poor insight. Let's follow you all over the world. the same danger I think exists for Gen AI. It's great to get content for the individual, but at the end of the day, you're trying to create a conversation. You're trying to you probe, what are your specific interests? So you need to go a level below that. You need to understand the readiness to change of the individual. You need to take them through a process of saying, let's get you curious about this thing. Before we try and get you to get the red shirt, maybe we should tell you all about how Tiger Woods won without the broken leg, or he had this amazing comeback and won the Masters. Maybe there's a curiosity factor. These are basic behavior change principles by Alan. If you can get that curiosity going and change the person's approach or thought process towards that particular thing, you've got a better shot at offering them something that's going to help them. So I think the context and contextualization is important. It's not just being able to generate content. Content for the sake of content is boring. Because I remember I watched Blade Runner. I don't know if I'm dating myself. And Blade Runner, brilliant movie. Some really up-and-coming actors were in that movie. But I remember it was visually so noisy. It was like a whole bunch of stuff going on. And they asked the director, why did he make this film so dense? And he said, imagine the world in the future where you'd just be bombarded with information and adverts all the time. And I look back now, I'm like, he was right. Wherever you go, somebody's trying to grab your attention. So eventually you become quite nulted. Sadly, like gun violence in this country, you hear it so often that there's an immunity that kind of washes over us, where it's not that surprising that things are happening. I think the same is true for grabbing somebody's attention in healthcare. It's the strong message of you will die if you smoke. It's lost because there's so many other things that might kill us. There's so many other foreign entities that might have an impact on us. Yeah, so the context to create the curiosity, I think that's something worth exploring. I do think that the application of AI to get that right is important because it's not that obvious anymore. There are cues, there are things that happen over the course of time that will lead you to a behavior. It's not just a snapshot, oh, people like you get this, people like you get that. It's what is that built up experience, that relationship experience. So if you can marry Gen AI with context and history, I think there's a very interesting convergence of both technology and what we know to work in terms of coaching, behavior, relationship.
Stephen, let me pick your brain on this a little bit. LexisNexis is now monitoring everybody's car behavior. Any new car from like 2017, it's giving data, which is then being sold to insurance, which is giving more accurate data to insurance companies. I'm like, it goes to the actuary, who then makes a decision. And you're seeing that insurance companies are actually correcting a mistake that they think where they have and so they're raising rates, which is actually engaging backwards, right? It's not engaging individuals, it's actually making them more hostile towards insurance, right? I can see the same thing happening in healthcare as well. The more information, the more it's going to start bombarding you with decisions that's decided for you. How can you, as a purpose-driven company, and as someone who concerns themselves with how do we build curiosity, what sort of structure do you need to avoid okay, we have clearer data, that means X decisions, which may have negative impact on someone wanting to engage with you?
I think let's just back that up a little bit. So there's broadly two types of car insurance, the telematics and then there's non-telematics. It's well known that the folk that gravitate towards telematics are better drivers. So you've got a strong selection bias there where people are taking that because they don't mind being monitored because they're good drivers, which means that you're actually stripping off some of that good risk from the broader pool. So it's a very strange environment where largely, I would argue, a lot of people using telematics products are good drivers to begin with. Obviously, their driving can deteriorate over time, in which case they could be punitive as well. But you have to be transparent about that up front. What you've got to ask yourself is your purpose to attract better risk, or is your purpose to get people to drive better? We've got a program in South Africa, which is called Discovery Drive, where if you drive well, you get a discount. I think it's 50% off your gas at the gas tank. Talk about convergence. Your driving translates to real hard cash change at the gas station. Obviously, there's a narrow network there, but it is a very visceral response. I know that I brake too hard, I accelerated too hard, and I can see my driving score come down. It also encouraged engagement with the end consumer to say, you're not measuring me, you're measuring my wife. I was the passenger in this car. It wasn't me because we use mobile as well, which in turn made the product that much better because we're able to accommodate those factors. So I think where you start with your purpose actually dictates the relationship with the customer and then how the product evolves, because absolutely people will bail out. You can take the two-tier, you either got it or you don't. You can apply that to healthcare. A lot of people say this program looks great, but I'm not an athlete. There's a lot of programs out there. There are a dime a dozen that encourage you to exercise, give you a reward. So you got to ask yourself, what's your purpose? If your purpose is to attract better risk, you might. If your purpose is to make people healthier and you're transparent about that, then you take a different side. You say to somebody, look, we'll meet you where you're at. For you, as an individual, based on your risk, just get to 5,000 steps 3 times a week. You don't have to hit the gold standard 10,000 steps. And over time, we'll nudge you to the right levels for you.
Yeah.
That unlocks profound value for the individual. But to answer your question, Steve, it comes back to the purpose. So I think the outcomes, the negative outcomes, are a consequence of not being clear about what's the purpose behind the program and being transparent about that. Because I know that if I don't engage, my rates go up front. I know that. Then when my rates do go up, it's nudged to engage. This is punitive. I'm being punished for what I haven't done. It is all about purpose and relationship. See, this is moving away from the transaction. If your relationship with your payer is exactly that, you see them as a payer who's meant to pay, that's fundamentally different to, I've bought this product and there's a vested interest. We are in it together to make me live longer, healthier, and I take responsibility for my parts of that.
It's like having a mobile bank app versus having an app that helps me budget my finances. I'm engaged at the budget.
Exactly.
Trying to get to a more effective use of money.
Yeah.
Whereas the other one's, here's what happened.
Yeah. We've got a bank in South Africa. Our holding company is South African. They launched a bank, which is the world's first behavioral bank. And it's quite unique in that you join the bank and it gives you incentives to improve your credit score, to improve your behavior. So it doesn't seek to give you necessarily more loans. It tries to improve those things that create good credit score. And the better you financially behave, the lower your interest rates, which is natural. So a very different mindset. The purpose is to help you live a longer, more healthy economic life. But that says, as a bank, we're going to help you budget, not we're going to give you more credit and try and get you to move your wallet.
Very cool.
I don't have any other questions, Steve. Anything?
Well, I think the last one is really as getting back to the purpose of with the Future Focused CXO. You did a very nonlinear path. You made not just a shift, you made a fundamental perpendicular shift from gold mining, thermodynamics to healthcare product design. What sort of advice would you give others that are working towards becoming a CXO? Wherever you are, you're trying to get to here into the C-suite. What does that look like for you? And how can you not think that you're breaking yourself? You're sending yourself in the wrong direction by having a non-linear career path.
Sure. I firmly believe that non-linear career paths are what is needed to get to the next level. And the reason for that, and it's not based on my experience, just what I've seen is the more you can skill yourself up with different ways of thinking, the better you're armed to succeed in the future. I spoke about running towards problems. It sounds like a very trite thing to say, but I firmly believe in that. I firmly think that taking things on that are uncomfortable grows you as a person. I've had several folk that have worked with me over the years, and I've recognized talent that they had and asked them to try something else. And they were all like, oh man, I'm too scared to do that. That's crazy. I can't do that. And now they're masters of a range of things because of that belief that they got in themselves over time. I don't believe that anything is beyond an individual to learn. I think you always underestimate just how much you know. I used to think that things were very difficult when I was young, and now those things seem simple. They're not. They're still difficult. Yes, some technology has helped, but it still takes a lot of effort to get change done. You have to think through it. You have to learn what's unique about this change. I'd say embrace learning as much as you can is one thing. I've never been a proponent of seeking out a title or a level. And maybe that's bad advice. I don't know that I've had a stellar career, but so maybe that's shocking advice. But what I have always been a proponent of is trying to do better and trying to do good. And often that means going where others don't necessarily want to go. I was thinking about diversity and inclusion. Post-COVID, there's this big backlash from me to really focusing on important conversations about diversity and inclusion. And a lot of people are nervous to have that discussion. And yet, if you flip that over to design and the design practice, you've got design thinking, which says you should have as many different voices contributing to understanding the problem space before you presuppose the solution. To me, those are the same thing. They're all about including as much and diverse thinking as possible. So if you flip that on its head and say, as an individual, am I affording myself the ability to have a diverse view of the situation? The answer is no. Chances are you're with a stream of a whole bunch of people who are thinking the same as you. So I think non-linearity is probably the best way to immunize yourself against becoming a commodity, certainly at any level. And I think the more you seek to learn, the more you build up on your base. And over time, things appear to become easier, but they're not. They're difficult. You just happen to have mastered a whole lot of skill sets that make you more valuable, I think, as an asset or as an individual.
Thank you.
We're
Thank
getting
you
very
so much.
philosophical at the end of this discussion.
Yeah, you did.
No,
Love it.
it is. See, and I was honestly just thinking that we ask this question to every CXO we get them on podcast, right? It might be very interesting to really consolidate these answers and publish them, saying that what it takes to become a CXO, right? And again, it's an open-ended question. It's not just follow one path, right?
I think that'd be fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Stephen. It was so nice talking to you. Thank you for spending time with us.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And that was a really great discussion.